Okay. Hi, Nancy. Great to have you with us today. For our viewers, today we have a very special guest for our inspiring fundraising feature, calling in from Nairobi, Kenya, namely Nancy Aburi. I've known Nancy for many, many years and probably shouldn't be counting them, and at different stages of her career and in different roles. Nancy never ceases to inspire me, and I'm sure she will you today. So great to see you, Nancy, and I hope you're well and thriving in Nairobi.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you and to have these conversations. We're doing well in Nairobi, still working from home, but doing well.
Good to hear.
How are you
Good to hear.
doing?
We're good here in Spain. The sun has come out. Summer is more or less arrived with us. And as we discussed, we're both double vaccine. So I think we feel pretty good, don't we, today?
Very privileged to be vaccinated.
Indeed,
Yes.
indeed. So if you don't mind, Nancy, just for our viewers, if you don't mind introducing yourself and saying a little bit about who you are.
Well, Nancy Aburi, as you've heard, I am heading UNHCR's private sector engagement in Africa. I have been with UNHCR for several years now, about 10 years now, in different roles, but currently in Africa, leading our fundraising, our outreach to African private sector. That's be companies, foundations, individuals across the continent. So we have a small team here in Nairobi, in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa that I lead.
Wow. And how's it been going during COVID? Because I've been hearing that UNHCR has been really being very successful in its fundraising the last year.
Yes, we have. I must say also, I returned to fundraising in January this year, having been doing a different role within UNHCR. And after 2 years absence from fundraising, coming back and seeing the growth that's happening within UNHCR in particular. Africa, for instance, is a very new market for UNHCR, only started about 4 years ago. And probably 5 years ago, we would never have imagined that we would be where we are. So the interest, the solidarity we see with refugees has really grown even through COVID, especially from our private philanthropy, foundations, corporations as well. So it's good times. Difficult, but
that's
good times.
so good to hear because, I recall right back at the beginning of UNHCR's private sector fundraising 20 years ago, even the belief that maybe the public would not find it an issue to support and that the corporate sector wouldn't get behind it, but how the world has changed and changed for the better in that sense.
Absolutely. We are very well on our way to achieving $1 billion from private sector per year. We're just over the $500 million mark a year now. So it's incredible growth. I've been here for 10 years and it's been amazing to see that trajectory.
What a journey. Well, you didn't exactly start your career in fundraising, did you? Am I right that selling perfumes and potentially moving to cigarettes was not very inspiring for you? So tell me more about how you got into it.
Absolutely. I studied, my bachelor's was in design in Nairobi. I then moved to London for postgraduate diploma at the time in advertising. I was hoping to build my career in advertising. I was actually pretty good at it. And in my last year in college, we had a project to package and sell a perfume that really was not appealing in any way, shape, or form. And I remember sitting with, working in groups and sitting with my group. And this was for our last final assignment. And trying to come up with copy for this perfume that none of us wanted on their skin, and settling on actually selling the bottle and trying to convince the buyer that the bottle was an amazing piece of design and would look so wonderful on their shelf. And at that moment in the pub in Watford, somewhere in the pub, I just had this, I thought, this cannot be my life. I cannot spend the rest of my career trying to sell products to people, products that I personally don't believe in.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I feel that about a perfume, what's going to happen when I'm handed a cigarette account or any other product that I don't personally believe in? And that was the turning point for me. And so then I started looking at what else could my skills do and what was I passionate about. And one of those things was giving back to society, and especially giving back to my continent, to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I was in London. I was beginning to think that maybe I will not come back to Nairobi. I was really falling in love with Dublin and with an Irishman at the same time. And so I started then looking around at what else I could do with a background in marketing, communications, and advertising. And by chance, Concern Worldwide had advertised for a position, and took a look at it, having only been to Dublin once in my life before, and applied for the position. And that is how my journey in fundraising started.
Fantastic. And Concern Worldwide is, well, it continues to grow and expand. And in fact, internationally, it's a wonderful Irish development nonprofit. Tell us a little bit about those early years in Dublin. Very different to what you were anticipating, I guess.
Very different, and also, but very familiar at the same time. I remember arriving in Dublin, meeting my colleagues, meeting my bosses, being the only African person in the entire headquarters office. That was very odd. But then once I got out to the fundraising and to meeting Irish people, communities, because I was a community fundraiser. My first job was a community fundraising officer. And I started going out to schools, to church groups, to community groups in particular. And there was just a sense for me of warmth from Irish people that was so familiar, coming from where I was coming from, and an incredible sense of generosity. I really, truly, to this day, haven't had a job that was so inspiring. Maybe because it was the first one, but that was a great start. And I really, very nostalgic for the early days of my fundraising career.
Fantastic. I wonder if that feeling you got from the Irish people and the really, truly strong sense of philanthropy and generosity there comes from its own history. I mean, the Irish diaspora, the famine, people in Ireland don't have to go too many generations back to know poverty and suffering.
This is what I learned. Very quickly, I started, as part of my fundraising journey and community fundraising, when I sat with groups, they would tell me those stories. And when we talked about the work of concern with poor farmers in Africa, for instance, it didn't take 5 seconds for an Irish person to say, this reminds me of my grandparents, this, and this sense of really very unique understanding of and also them telling me it wasn't so long ago that we had pit latrines in our backyards. Yeah. So the story I was trying to sell to them was very familiar to them, and I think that's where that came from, and this understanding that where Ireland had come from and the development that they had seen. I was there just at the beginning of the Celtic Tiger. So this new world coming up. It was a great time to be fundraising, really. I can't think of a better place and a better time to have been getting into fundraising.
And community fundraising, in a sense, is almost a precursor to face-to-face fundraising that came along later and actually transformed Concern Worldwide. It was by far the biggest face-to-face fundraiser in Ireland, and probably still is today under normal circumstances. How did community fundraising prepare you for a career that really has been much more on, well, right, you say now, corporate partnerships, leadership giving? Were there some skills that you learned through that you've brought through to your work today even?
I think the most important one was probably the importance of taking your time to build trust with partners, to build and trust as a foundation for a long-term relationship. Community fundraising takes a lot of time. I had drunk countless cups of Barry's tea.
Strong tea.
Very, Barry's tea in communities, and overnight, go up to the north of Ireland, to the west, to the south, to Cork, everywhere, and sit with groups of people and get to know them, get to know their families, get to go to their farms with them and meet them. So it's very time consuming, but the importance of that is, for the years that I worked with Concern, I probably met each and every one of our community donors, but then I probably only had to meet them once.
Yeah.
And that relationship was built for life. So that importance of taking the time to build relationships, strategic and long-term, understanding also why they were giving and why this was this meant so much to that lady who was organizing cupcake sales for the Concern Fast, which was one of our annual events. Why that teacher was taking so much time to bring this to her students and organize them to do a walk or whatever it is they would do to raise money for Concern, and really understanding their motivation. That has served me well in the space in corporate fundraising, and also especially on relationships with high net worth individuals, because it's very similar, just different. Yeah.
It's interesting when I hear you describe it like that. It's exactly how you'd be mentoring somebody going into high net worth or corporate. It's listening. What's their motivations? Why do they need and want to support? Yeah, I can now see that transition being very helpful. Yeah. And so many fundraisers never get to meet a donor or potential donor, which I find a little scary if you're a fundraiser and you've never actually spoken or listened to people.
Absolutely. And this is why, some of the developments we have now that also really, really excite me in digital, but obviously then you miss that opportunity to meet people and to have conversations with them, understand them. We used to organize trips as well for our donors in those days, and also bringing together the donors and the beneficiaries as well when we could. And so that was, and standing back as the fundraiser to observe that dynamic and what you learn from that. I missed that, actually. I really missed that. That was incredible.
Fantastic. But there must have been challenges nonetheless. Challenges because you'd come from advertising, you were now in a new sector, you're in a country that you were familiar with, but it was different in a sense. What was the challenge moving to the next role? Because you moved on from Concern, and
even within next? Concern, I moved on actually to from community fundraising to corporate fundraising before I even then moved out of the organization. So it was learning different types of fundraising. First of all, I think where I am now, I'm a pretty well-rounded fundraiser, if I can use that word. But it means I also got very quickly, within 6 months, I got into a management role at Concern. So I was managing teams, doing corporate fundraising and events and other different things, and those were all new things to me. So then I had to learn everything about fundraising to be able to manage that. Being in a new, and I think also at the time, I don't remember fundraising being thought of as this very professional path. So there wasn't many places to go to develop your skills other than learning from your bosses, learning from the people you worked with, and once a year maybe attending the fundraising conferences or something. So I kind of learned on the job, I would say. I just went along with it, and it was very intuitive. It's what felt right in terms of how you treat donors. But I truly think that a foundation in community fundraising helped me for the rest of it, of the job.
Absolutely sure. And you mentioned to me earlier that you used to go to the conference in Birmingham for the Institute of Fundraising, which was very special because for those who were there from the UK and elsewhere, that conference took place in such isolation. You say you were going to Birmingham, you were actually going to an exhibition centre with an airport and a hotel and nothing else. It was really great fun though, and that intensity was a very special part of our learning together there.
It was incredibly special, and I remembered actually. I think I attended once in London, just outside Euston somewhere, before it then moved to Birmingham. And those were the great old days, and they would have the gala evening where the best fundraising events were. That was incredible. But that is it. That's where I learned my craft. That's where I remember attending a 101 fundraising 101 course there. It really is where I learned how to fundraise and how to start thinking about fundraising as this professional journey that I needed to also invest in to develop my skills.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you said you were very rapidly promoted into a management position. And I was 27, I suddenly was managing 50 staff from managing almost none. One of the things that I often think about the profession is we haven't really prepared ourselves or even the next generation particularly well as managers. We've not given people management skills. We've given them technical or technique skills. How do you think we could do that better?
I think sometimes it starts very simple by also giving people more responsibility. So because not in every situation will you have some very small organizations, you not have many people that there's a hierarchy of one person manages 3 people, 5 people, but learning to manage or leadership can also begin with how you lead and manage and influence, learning, having opportunities to practice those skills even with your donors and across your organization. I think every fundraiser has that opportunity because especially we work with the other parts of the organizations, the field, the program, the donor care, the finance department, and we need to influence them to help us do our job better, to get that report that we need. Those are all opportunities for fundraisers to practice their leadership skills. And I think that's why I managed to prove myself in how my relationship with the donor care team, for instance, people that did not necessarily report to me. And that kind of interaction, interpersonal skills that are quite relevant in management. So I think that's the one place where we can start as leaders, as not being micromanagers, by letting people really take a complete run of whatever initiative they're responsible for, including those sort of horizontal relationships that they need to develop. And then when the opportunity comes, allowing them and mentoring them into more formal leadership roles.
That's interesting because actually a lot of what you're describing as well are the soft skills, aren't they? Which I guess you're applying when you're meeting donors and community groups. And I've seen some people come into an organization with very hard management skills and can't figure out why finance isn't talking to them, program isn't providing the information you need, and their own staff are not comfortable. So I guess, developing soft skills is something that's been key in your career development as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. Very important.
And had you been given any advice at the early part of your career? What advice would you wish to have been given had you sort of entered, stopped selling perfumes and potentially cigarettes, and then somebody said, by the way, you're going to work in the non-profit sector? What would the advice you'd like to have heard?
Oh, I think 2 things. One, I wish somebody had told me how addictive this was going to be. That's for sure. And the second one, I wish somebody had told me how the politics of it can be. We're all in this trying to do good, but sometimes the political dynamics get in the way. So, but the first one is how addictive it is. And I think once you have gotten in there, understood the need, secured that first big donation, delivered it, brought through a really good report for your donor and is very happy with the work that you have done, the adrenaline, then you want more of it and more of it. And I have tried to quit fundraising, I think twice now in my career. I keep coming back. So it's very addictive, but in the most positive kind of way, because you're creating impact, and the more impact you create, the more you want to create. So that's pretty good. In the not so good way, I think sometimes the politics is quite discouraging, and that's I did not expect that in this space. I thought these are all people out to do a lot of good, and why would we have politics?
It's interesting, isn't it? Often when people come to us and they're coming from the corporate sector and we ask, what's the motivation and why? And it's usually not financial, because clearly the salaries often don't match those of the corporate sector. They go, oh, because everybody's so nice in the not-for-profit sector. And we go, oh, you have a lot of learning to do. In fact, people can be even more invested in their position because it's a position of passion, even if it's one you disagree with it. And then the politics knock in. Difficult. Well, you've obviously described your work in Ireland, but you've lived in the USA, the UK. You're now in Kenya. You've worked around the world. I wouldn't even know if you've counted how many countries you've actually worked in and with, but Quite a few.
Italy. I've lived in Italy as well.
Oh, you lived in Italy.
And worked in Italy and covered. And, since I left Concern, I've mostly been in regional roles. So even when I was in Italy, I was working with the southern of Europe and MENA in Africa. Yeah. So I've worked a lot in fundraising in MENA. I actually really helped develop our first strategy for UNHCR in MENA in 2012, around that time. So, and then the US. And the US also, I moved then to UN Women. So I was the head of private sector fundraising globally for the US. So we got to do a lot of fundraising in Latin America as well, and pretty much all over the world. I have almost lost count.
I usually count and then I get reminded of one that, I forgot that's a country, Liechtenstein. Yes, sorry.
I don't think I have as many as you do, Daryl, though. I think you're more than I do. Yeah.
But I often get told, oh my gosh, that must be so glamorous and so forth, traveling around the world in a non-pandemic situation. But what are the highs and lows, the positives and the negative view of that big travel picture, if you like, or working internationally?
I think working internationally for me is learning the different cultures, and I mean sort of like professional cultures as well, different ways of working. And that means not just in the office setting, but also with your donor stewardship, and what it looks like for your European donors is very different from what it looks like from your American donors, your Asian donors, and then we have MENA donors as well. So the difference in even how you secure that gift, a lot of similarities, but some differences. And I'm always excited actually to note the similarities quite often. So that thing we talked about earlier about taking time to build trust, I have found this to be across the board. It doesn't matter which culture you're working with. And then in other instances, we have a lot of differences. So I think that's been exciting, actually. That's where I feel like on every job I have been on, I'm learning something new. I'm experiencing something new. I'm growing in different ways because of that. The challenges, mostly when I was younger, it was all fun, a lot of fun. Now I have, a young man, a young son who is 11. So for the family that's moving around a lot, becomes more of an issue. But I think overall it's been really exciting for me to work in different contexts and with different in different settings as well.
I remember a piece of advice I was given, and I think it's often given at conferences and trainings, is as fundraisers, we have one of these and two of these. And I don't mean headset, I mean ears. And that listening, and I often even find listening varies from culture to culture. It's often the nuanced pieces of information that's being shared with you that are often more important than the business numbers or whatever. How do you deal with picking up those cultural insights that help you build trust, I guess?
Listening, like you said. And I think this is where, for me, the face-to-face meeting, spending time with people, I think for me, at least for my probably my personality as well, because there is so much more you read when you're with somebody across the room than in a letter, in an email. And I found, I remember when I started on one of my roles out of Rome, and I used to travel a lot to MENA, and we as UNHCR had been working with this particular donor for a year. We were expecting a certain thing out of this. We were expecting some big event, and we're expecting to raise $500,000. And I went there to meet them for the first time, and within 5 minutes, I knew there was no $500,000 coming. They were not happy with us, but they would never say no.
Yes.
On an email or on a phone call. Every time my colleagues went and met them, they had lots of cups of teas, but it was all once every few months because somebody was traveling from London or somewhere else to go and meet them. And you go out there and you actually sit and you look them in the eye and you look the body language. And I knew there was an issue. And until we found out what the issue was and addressed that, proud to say, once we addressed that, this is now a relationship that still exists for us, and it's now worth in the double digits of millions. But we had to overcome that obstacle first, and it was never going to happen on emails. So that's the thing of working in different cultures and actually taking a step back to hear what you're not hearing.
Yeah. Do you remember that phrase, there are 10 ways of no, meaning yes, that used to be taught to us? But there's also 10 ways of people saying yes when it actually means no. So, and often we don't pick that up because it's nuanced. I actually think Zoom, we're not, we don't get that same sense, do we? Because my camera's there, you're there on the screen. So where is the eye contact and it's an interesting nuance that I wonder how much we're losing from not having that physical contact and reading all the other bits of body language. So amazing. So the sector must have changed enormously during the period you've been working in it. And what do you think have been the most fundamental changes and positive changes? And maybe also where are we going wrong these days? Because trajectory is not always positive.
Yeah, I'm really taken back, and amazed by the opportunities and the possibilities that growth in digital has brought for us. That this idea that you could be a tiny 2-person charity in the middle of nowhere, you couldn't be in Timbuktu and you could be speaking and engaging with donors anywhere in the world, this for me is absolutely fascinating and great. And I think the growth I have seen in digital from when I started and to now is probably the key highlight for me. I see that even from my own organization and for the job I'm doing. We can operate in Africa, for instance, now and have an office in Nairobi in just 4 countries, but we cover the whole continent. We're receiving donations as far out from Mauritius and everywhere else, and we don't need to be there. So that for me is pretty, and from the diaspora too. And that for me is pretty fascinating. And I can't wait to see what that means for fundraising in general into the future. And but on the flip side of that is, like I said, I hope that we find other ways then to really get to know our donors. If we're speaking to them digitally, then how do you understand that? So kind of combining, how do you use digital and how do you supplement that with some donor care, donor development that speaks to the donors and what they need and the engagement that they expect from organizations. But having said that, I also recognize that for a lot of people, our new donors in particular, the younger ones, they are okay to have that donor engagement on digital. It's of a certain age that are still, hoping for somebody to send me an email or to call me up on the phone.
Your son will probably never send emails. Seriously, I mean, trying to convince, my son's 28. He's very digital, but the idea of answering an email versus WhatsApp or some other form of communication, it's interesting. And I wouldn't say they're less engaged. I'm amazed how engaged they are with friends and to a depth as well. But it's quite funny how quickly email for a generation is an obsolete tool. And yet actually for the 40, 50 pluses, it's still a powerful fundraising tool and communication tool. But
absolutely.
I don't know about you, but I was on a call the other day with sort of the global heads of face-to-face fundraising around the world from the big agencies, including the UN agencies. And artificial intelligence is telling us more and more what donors look like. I think one of my fears, and the more I read, is that it will replicate stereotypes. In other words, donors will end up looking like a 37.5-year-old Anglo-Saxon woman in a certain profession. And actually you'll ignore all the opportunity because we haven't learned the language to speak with different diverse communities in fundraising.
But I hope that somebody's thinking about these things already and they can figure out how we don't end up there. But
I hope so. Because I keep reading these things about all these artificial intelligence written by these geeky white men in Silicon Valley who live off pizza and whatever. But we're coming to the end. But one thing I really loved, because I was looking earlier today at your profile on LinkedIn, which is very important in career terms, and we've talked about that on other occasions, how maintaining that is important. But you use the phrase harnessing African philanthropy, which I really love that line. Would you like to share with us what you mean by that?
When I took on this role, one of the things I had a lot from people was this doubt that we could be successful in fundraising in Africa. That fundraising was a concept not so well thought of or recognized in Africa. And I beg to differ big time. And that line is to say, actually, philanthropy, this maybe not in the word, but the act of generosity, giving, caring about your neighbor, being part of a community, solidarity is very much part of our culture. It exists in every form at every level of society, from the wealthy to the poorest. The poorest people have community, a sense of community. I don't know anywhere else where when people die, we come together and we contribute money for a funeral. We contribute money for weddings. It's very much part of our culture. So what I'm trying to say is that this exists, and I'm trying to, with my team and for UNHCR and for refugees, to harness that in a different form to support people forced to flee. So I'm not creating philanthropy in Africa. It already exists. I'm simply tapping into it. We're trying to see how we can shape that to support refugees. So that's what I mean.
But also, I mean, there's a rich language. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but the word Ubuntu, for example, in Swahili has a very rich meaning of community fundraising.
And Zulu. And you know, that is a word that exists almost in different forms for almost every culture that I know of in Africa. I am because you are.
Yeah. Is that what the translation would be? Ah, fantastic. No, because I've heard that word and I think it's so rich, and I feel a sense it's true, because when I was working in South Africa with SOS Children's Villages, for example, I came across that word as part of the philosophy of their village fundraising as well.
Yep, absolutely. And you'll find it across countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa. We have different words for it depending on which tribes or which language you're speaking. But it's a concept that is well understood by everybody. Yeah. So this idea that we're going to teach Africans fundraising, no, maybe we're trying to do it in in a different way. But it's been here. So I'm simply looking to harness that to support people forced to flee.
Fantastic. And finally, well, thank you very much once again. But is there one piece of advice or one piece of thought that you'd like to share with our viewers today?
That fundraising is addictive, maybe. If you're thinking about getting into fundraising, it's an absolutely satisfying career. It is a profession like any other. So if you get into it, do take your time to invest in your self-development, just like you would in any other career as well. Seek out mentors to help you do that, and people that you admire in the sector that can teach you one thing or the other. If you're aiming for management positions in particular, you have to be all-rounded, because I also find that in fundraising, you find, specialists, people who are face-to-face fundraisers, digital fundraisers. But the advice I give most people is figure out what you want to be. Do you want to be a specialized fundraiser? So therefore then commit your time to building that skill, that expertise. If you just want to be a digital fundraiser, then do that. If you want to be in a leadership role, like I did, I kind of had to be all-rounded and understand all aspects of fundraising and then be able to lead. So yeah, I think that would be my parting shots, that it's a great career to be in. Treat it just like any other profession and seek out your personal growth as you go along.
Fantastic advice. Thank you very much, Nancy. And thank you again for joining us today. And I hope we get the chance to meet in person again after all of this crazy pandemic is over, and celebrate our wonderful shared joy of fundraising and philanthropy.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank you very much, Daryl. It's been a pleasure being with you, and I look forward to chatting again.
Take care. Computer.